Well, welcome to 2016. It's already shaping up to be a very interesting year, isn't it? In case you haven't noticed, Europe is in complete turmoil because of the insane decision there to allow mass immigration of people who have a very different idea of how society should function. Let's be honest, they've allowed a lot of thugs and barbarians up in there, and these people will not simply integrate into a Western society. I have no idea what people like Merkel were thinking when they could simply have seen what was already going on in other places that had allowed many of these Muslims to move up. Norway, the rate has skyrocketed. Switzerland, the Jews are being forced to move out of certain neighborhoods. In Belgium, there are whole Muslim neighborhoods who think they can just run their area with their own law, and they would like to take over all of Belgium. There's several things like that going on in Europe. Of course, now they're wanting to shut the borders down, but it's a little too late. Greece is caught right in the middle as the people flood up, and through there, now the rest of Europe is wanting Greece to open a camp and keep them down there. Of course, the Greeks don't want that. They're broke as it is. Their country is in pieces. And the Greeks themselves are protesting the latest decision by the unelected troika called the IMF. That's the International Monetary Fund. People who were not elected by anyone but put in office by other, unfortunately, elected officials. And these people make decisions that can ruin nations, and they pretty much have destroyed Greece, and the Greeks are protesting the latest decision by these people. And of course, in this country, we see protest after protest happening, and just honestly, the world is getting quite insane. I said I would make a video on the economy, and so here it is. It took me a while to get around to it. I actually made another one, but it was way too long, so I decided to split it in 2 or 3 parts. I made this with the hope that maybe I can give you a little more understanding of what and why things are working out the way they are, help you be prepared and not be so fearful about what is coming. There's a lot of fear-mongering out there and a lot of strange teachings, and I don't want you to get caught up in some of this nonsense that's being taught. Last year I said the economy would not collapse because of some blood moon or some other Jewish cycle. I said gold would not go to 10,000 an ounce, and I said we would not have hyperinflation. And guess what? We are not going to have hyperinflation this year. Gold is not going to 10,000 an ounce. Oil will stay low, and we will see even more deflation this year. Now, I guess we'll see whether I'm right by the end of the year or these guys teaching these blood moon Jewish cycle nonsense. Look, it's simple common sense. We can look at things logically. I stumbled across this quote from Ellen White that I think is very interesting. She said, "We are to be guided by true theology and common sense." Yeah, we're all going to be honest, especially the more conservative of us. Sometimes we let common sense just fly out the window because we get caught up in this end time scenario type stuff. But I believe if we look at things logically today, we can see why they're happening. We can understand what's going to happen, and we can make the necessary preparations for what appears to be coming down the road here in the next couple years. Now, while I said the economy will not collapse, will not totally melt down this year, the economy is collapsing. Even the IMF came out at the end of last year and said it's just a matter of time before we have an even worse economic collapse than we had in 2008. Actually, we're going to have a much worse collapse, I believe. Everybody feels that something's just not right. Just look around and see what everyone's saying and how everyone's talking, or how everyone's feeling. Now, I believe in order to really get ready, you need to kind of understand why and how this is all happening. So the first part of this, my talk on the economy, I want to kind of explain a couple things I've noticed and why I've come to the conclusions I have. Why I decided it was not hyperinflation we were headed into. So let's look at a few things here. First of all, interest rates are at an all-time low. They're even negative in some places. And just recently, the Fed started talking about bringing negative interest rates into this country. Now, you do not have negative interest rates with hyperinflation. This is not a sign of hyperinflation. Negative interest rates is a sign of severe deflation, depression type situation. 6 years ago is when I started looking at this. I too believed the hype about hyperinflation. No pun intended. But as I thought about it more, I realized we were headed into a severe deflationary period. Let's think about this. The QEs did nothing to stimulate the economy. Lower interest rates did nothing to stimulate the economy. We did not have inflation take off because of either one of those things. Yes, food has gotten higher, but I'll explain that later. But we did not have we really didn't even have a regular inflation, even with those two things. The velocity of money was and still is extremely low. That means money is not changing hands like it needs to be. This is deflation, not hyperinflation. And to be technically correct, the Fed actually did not print money. They bought bonds and other securities from the banks, which in essence gave money to the banks. This was all basically digital money changing hands. And the amount of money they made available that way was really a drop in the bucket compared to the money the banks lost investing in derivatives. But what's worse is, how are these banks ever going to buy these bonds back? Well, that's a question for several years down the road. And at that point, we could see lots of inflation, if they even have the money to buy them back then. But that's for farther down the road. What we have today is deflation, not hyperinflation. And here's what happens in a severe deflationary period. There's not enough money to go around, so more people are laid off, which in turn causes even less money to go around, which in turn causes even more layoffs. Add to that Obamacare, and you have even less jobs. Now, if you take the number of people actually on food stamps and how many how that has increased in the past several years, you see that we are in a very severe deflationary period. Don't pay attention to the nonsense they're putting out on the news. The news is acting like everything's just fine and dandy. And they tout these ridiculous employment numbers, but there's lots and lots of people who just gave up looking for work. So this is all a deflationary, headed into depression type situation. And here's what happens in such a situation. Houses, lands, and non-essential prices drop like a rock because nobody has money to buy those things. For example, in 1930, a typical house cost $7,000. By 1939, it was $3,800, just about half. And if you have debt, well, just think about what happened to the farmers that had huge debt during the Depression. They lost everything. What are you going to do with a $250,000 house you owe $200,000 on when it's worth $125,000 and you just lost your job or you're at part-time work? Or what about that $400,000 house when it drops to $200,000 and you're not making the money you're used to making? In a deflationary situation, cash is king. Now, maybe I should backtrack a minute. So the point I was trying to make with houses is try to get out of debt for obvious reasons. Things are going to get worse. And then try to have cash on hand. Now everybody was saying get out of dollars, they're collapsing, but the dollar has actually gotten stronger. And it will even get stronger over the next year or two. Now this is actually a bad thing, and maybe I'll talk about that later, but the dollar is going to get stronger. One big reason that's going to happen is because there's no place left for other countries to park large amounts of money. They're certainly not going to dump money in the euro. And the Russia and China, they don't have enough money to be people dumping tons in. Look what's happening in China right now. They're trying to get out of the yuan and get into dollars, so the banks are limiting how many US dollars they can actually have. So the dollar is going to get strong. I shouldn't just say cash, because if I have some listeners with using euros, they're not going to get stronger. But the dollar is going to get stronger. So you see how knowing some of this can help you make wise decisions instead of running around worrying about our money being worthless and making bad decisions and doing things based on some preacher who just doesn't know what he's talking about. We can make wise decisions. If cash will be king, you can invest in cash in several ways. One is by having cash on hand. Don't trust the banks, especially large commercial banks. Don't buy gold, at least not yet. Don't take out huge loans thinking you can just pay them off with cheap dollars. I actually know somebody that did that, and they sunk. And well, of course, they end up kind of bankrupt. Well, they lost everything they had. I know other people have sunk their money in gold when it hit 2,000 ounce. That's got to hurt. Now, if they hold on to it long enough, I do think gold's going to go back past that, but they could have done better by buying it when it drops, I believe, below 800 an ounce. Others are living in fear every day. We don't need to do any of this stuff. Instead of making bad decisions, living in fear, let's just realize how everything works in a very clear, logical cycle. We just need to discover that cycle. No new blood moons or Jewish dates will have anything to do with it. It's all about the sovereign debt crisis we are in. Our debt will get to the point where it destroys this country. But that's not going to happen overnight. This is something you'll see progress with your eyes every day. Now, so you don't have to run out and empty your bank account tomorrow. But do start working on withdrawing some cash here and some cash there and slowly building up a supply on hand, because 2017 is when things are really going to get interesting. And I will talk about this later. However, there's one unknown as far as cash goes that could change everything. Now, I don't think it's going to affect us in the United States, but if there's anyone listening who's in Europe, this is something you may very well see. And China has announced they definitely want to do this also. This is the governments want to go to a cashless society. Europe's talked about, China just mentioned it. This is one way they can control all your money. Basically, this is one way they can steal the money from you. If they're headed this way and you're in places where this is headed, you want to get out and convert your money to some other form where they're not going to a cashless society. But I bet they put laws in place where that will be very hard to do. So that's where you will have to get into tangible items. Maybe gold, silver, maybe just items you use every day. Now, nobody knows exactly how it will all work out, but we can make assumptions based on what we can look back in history and see how it worked out then. And when countries have entered a sovereign debt crisis like we are going into, there's a pattern to how things progressed. First, the government starts tracking down every penny they can get their hands on because they're growing broke. And this is what we see is happening today. This is another sign of deflation. But it's going on all around us today. All over the world, government's going after money. That's one reason for a cashless society. They can have all the money then. But so far, some of the steps they've taken is banks have stopped allowing large wire transfers overseas. In parts of Europe, they'll stop and search you, and if they find a lot of money, they'll just take it. And they'll claim this is all in the name of terrorism, of course, but it's mostly because the governments are going broke. In this country, the police are taking money and even houses and cars from people without ever charging for a crime, and it's called civil forfeiture. They say it's to stop drugs, and it started out that way, but now it's being used to supplement the police budget. Lots of innocent people have had large amounts of money taken from them by the police, and they have to sue to get it back, and the vast majority of the time they never get their money back. If you have never heard of this, just Google civil forfeiture. You see, all this is being done by governments in desperation to get every penny they can, because money is not circulating like it needs to be, so they can keep spending like they're used to. But if you ever get pulled over in this country by the police and they ask you if you have a large sum of money on you, just say no. Pun is intended. But no, really, Otherwise, they might just take it from you and claim it's drug money. They do not have to arrest you for any crime. They just have to claim they think it's money for buying or selling drugs, and that's it. You can't go to court to prove you are innocent because you were not the one charged. Your money or whatever item they took was charged. Now, I'm not making this up. You can't make this kind of stuff up. The court documents will even read state versus $10,000 or whatever it is they took from you. And so you have to prove that the item they took is innocent of all crimes. Now, the item does not have rights like you do. So you see why most people never get this back. There's a story of a church secretary having all the church donations taken from her because she was stopped for speeding. They saw the money and they took it. Lots of innocent people like this. Here's one. An elderly couple from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania had their home seized after the son allegedly sold $20 worth of marijuana from the property's porch. Really? For $20 worth of pot, that's what that law was written for? No, most certainly not. The law was written to try and crack down on the great big huge kingpins of drugs. But now they're using it to supplement the police budget, and here's another house they could have. Question is, when the whole country legalizes marijuana, will they give the house back? Well, of course not. They've already sold it off. Here's a story I'll read straight from CNN. The nightmare began when police showed up at the house and arrested their 22-year-old son Yanni on drug charges, $40 worth of heroin. Authorities say he was selling drugs out of the home. The surveillances say they had no knowledge of any involvement their son might have had with drugs. A month and a half later, police came back, this time to seize their house, forcing the surveillances and their children out on the street that day. Authorities came with the electric company in tow to turn off the power and even began locking the doors with screws. Police and prosecutors came armed with a lawsuit against the house itself. End of story from CNN. Now, what kind of special crazy is this? Now, these people did eventually get their house back only because they had enough money to hire high-priced lawyers. Most just lose their house. But hey, more money for the margarita makers in the police station. Now, I bet you think I'm just kidding about that one. Google it. You see, this is what happens in a sovereign debt crisis. This is deflation, depression, when countries are running out of money, not hyperinflation. This is what happened to Rome. Like the military came in, and the way they got paid is how much they could basically steal from the people they supposedly were protecting. Well, FATCA, F-A-T-C-A, is another way this country is going after every penny they can get their hands on. This stands for Foreign Account Tax Compliance Act. What it means is that even if you live and work in another country, they expect you to pay taxes here. Yes, even if your money that's coming in is from another country, they expect you to pay taxes here. It really is insane, and we're one of the few countries that do this. However, other countries are now thinking about doing this because, like I said, all countries are broke and they're trying to find more money. Some people have even given up their American citizenship in order to quit paying this nonsense tax. Now, not only are they going after U.S. citizens who have moved to other countries and started a business and perhaps making money there, but they are going after non-U.S. citizens who maybe just happen to marry a U.S. citizen. Yes, once again, I am not making this up. I am not kidding you. There is one case, if I remember right, where an American woman married a non-American Canadian. And I remember right, he was a businessman, probably making a fair amount of money. That's why he got the attention of the IRS. The IRS claimed he owed this country money because he married a U.S. citizen. She finally gave up her citizenship just to get the IRS off their backs. See, this is what happens in a sovereign debt crisis. We can look at things like this going on. Now you have some knowledge. You can start paying attention to why we're headed into deflation, not hyperinflation. Just pay attention to things going on around about your lives every day. Things like flyers in the mail offering you a 5-year interest-free loan for a brand new car. Something unheard of just a few years ago. I mean, when we moved here in 2008, we needed another, well, we ended up needing 2 vehicles. I ended up buying 2 brand new vehicles. We bought a a 2008 minivan because they were offering me 0% financing. I figured, well, why not? I might as well make payments and just get this, because not only did I get 0% financing, but the price of the van was so much lower than it had been the year before that I was getting it cheaper than what some people were wanting for a 2-year-old minivan. That is another sign of deflation. You can start paying attention to these signs and see now that we're headed into severe depression. Well, what's the next thing a country does after they start going after every penny they can get? Well, they raise taxes. They'll have no choice. Well, they have a choice, but of course they won't do what's right. So in order to keep getting votes, in order to keep offering all the services people have come to expect, they will be forced to raise taxes. I believe they'll do it in some underhand, sneaky type of way so most people won't pay attention to what's really going on. Now, lots of people in many states and counties have already seen a hike on property tax because individual states are going bankrupt. Just get on Zillow, look up what the rates were in the past, then look at what the property tax is today on a house. The value of the house is actually lower, and you'll see the rates have definitely gone up. Look what Illinois did a few years back. You went to bed one night paying 3% income tax and woke up next day paying 5%, and they're still bankrupt. Higher taxes are looming in one form or another. Then at some point, even with higher taxes, even with collecting every penny they can, one of two things will happen. They will nationalize all pension funds and maybe all 401ks, or they will stop many services. My guess is they will take the funds first, just like other countries are doing now, because they do not want the chaos that stopping services will create. At that point, you definitely want to have all your cash on hand and start thinking about buying gold and other tangible items. Then they will eventually be forced to stop all services, and this is when people will lose faith in the government. And this lack of faith is when the dollar will start to become worthless. You see, the dollar used to be gold-based, and then it became petrol-based under Nixon. Now it's pretty much just faith-based. Lose faith in it, and what happens? So you see, there's a logical way these things will work out. Of course, there's some things that can change how it happens, but the path we're on right now is this path. But World War III can certainly delay or even change the outcome quite a bit, but I don't think it will completely stop it. One big reason is what begins to happen in 2017, but I'll talk about that in part 2.